The crack of a gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Pinos Altos, New Mexico territory, as Florence Kane ran for her life, her tattered skirt catching on brambles as she fled into the darkness of the pine-covered hills that gave the mining town its name. The year was 1871, and the West was still wild, but nothing had prepared her for the savagery she'd endured at the hands of her own family when they discovered her secret. Blood trickled down Florence's leg as she stumbled through the underbrush, the moonlight barely illuminating her path. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one sending sharp pains through her bruised ribs. She had been hiding her condition for months, but her mother had noticed the changes in her body, and that very night, her father and brothers had unleashed their fury with fists and belts, shouting accusations and condemnations until she'd managed to escape through her bedroom window. The sound of horses and angry voices in the distance spurred her forward. Florence knew if they caught her, she might not survive another beating not in her condition. The small life growing inside her depended on her survival now. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she wasn't certain. Her family had been God-fearing people, but the God they worshipped seemed to have no mercy for girls like her. As she crested a small rise, Florence spotted a campfire flickering in a clearing. Desperation overcame caution. She needed help, any help, even if it meant putting her fate in the hands of strangers. With one hand protectively covering her slightly swollen belly, she made her way toward the light. Lucas Morgan sat beside his campfire, cleaning his revolver by the dancing flames. 3 days of tracking had left him tired, but satisfaction warmed him more than the fire. The man he'd been hunting, a stagecoach robber who'd shot a mother of 2 during his last holdup, was now tied to a tree nearby, unconscious but alive to stand trial in Santa Fe. The bounty would be enough to keep Lucas comfortable through winter, maybe even put a down payment on that small ranch he'd been eyeing outside of Socorro. At 32, he was beginning to tire of the constant travel, the violence, the loneliness of the trail. Lately, he'd been thinking about settling down, though the right woman had yet to cross his path. A rustling in the underbrush snapped him to attention. His gun was assembled and aimed in seconds, his body coiled and ready. "Step out where I can see you," he called, his voice low and steady. "I won't ask twice." Florence emerged from the shadows, her hands raised. The firelight illuminated her battered face, one eye swollen shut, her lips split and bleeding, dark bruises forming on her cheeks and throat. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and despite her slight frame, Lucas immediately noticed the small swell of her belly. "Help me," she whispered before her legs gave way beneath her. Lucas moved with the speed and grace that had kept him alive through a dozen gunfights, catching her before she hit the ground. She was light in his arms, too light for a woman in her condition. As he laid her gently by the fire, he noticed more bruises on her arms, the distinct imprints of fingers where someone had gripped her with vicious strength. "Easy now," he said softly, retrieving his canteen. "You're safe here." Florence's good eye flickered open, fear evident in its depths. "They're coming," she rasped. "My father, my brothers. They'll kill me if they find me." Lucas handed her the canteen, watching as she drank greedily. "Why would your own family want to harm you?" Florence lowered the canteen, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "They beat me for getting with child," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "My father said I'd brought shame on the Kane name, that no daughter of his would bear a bastard." Something dark and dangerous flashed in Lucas's eyes. He'd seen many cruelties in his years as a bounty hunter, but violence against women, especially from those who should protect them, kindled a special kind of fury in him. "They'll never touch you again," he vowed, his voice hard as iron. "You have my word on that." Florence studied him, taking in his weather-beaten face. The scars that spoke of battles survived, the kind yet determined set of his jaw. Something about him made her believe him, despite everything she'd learned about the untrustworthiness of men. "I'm Lucas Morgan," he said, offering a handkerchief for her bleeding lip. "Bounty hunter, currently escorting that piece of work to justice." He nodded toward the unconscious man tied to the tree. "Florence Kane," she replied, wincing as she dabbed at her lip. "I worked at the mercantile in town until—" Her hand moved again to her belly. "How far along are you?" Lucas asked, his eyes softening. 5 months, I think. I've been hiding it with corsets and loose dresses." She looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. The father was passing through town. Said he loved me, promised to send for me once he'd established himself in California. I haven't heard from him since. Lucas nodded, understanding the old story. The West was full of men who left promises and pregnant women behind them. When did you last eat? Yesterday morning, before they found out. Without another word, Lucas moved to his saddlebags and retrieved some jerky, hardtack, and dried apples. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Eat slowly, he advised as he handed her the food. Too much at once might make you sick. As Florence ate, Lucas considered their situation. The prisoner needed to be delivered to Santa Fe within 3 days to collect the bounty. But he couldn't leave Florence alone, not with her family hunting her, and she was in no condition to make a hard ride to Santa Fe. We'll head to Silver City tomorrow, he decided. It's closer than Santa Fe, and I know the sheriff there. He can arrange for my prisoner's transport while we figure out what to do about your situation. Florence paused mid-bite. We? Lucas met her gaze steadily. I made you a promise, Miss Kane. I intend to keep it. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied simply. Get some rest. We leave at first light. Lucas kept watch through the night, listening for the approach of horses, but Florence's family didn't find them. Perhaps they'd assumed she'd fled in another direction, or maybe they'd given up the search until morning. Either way, Lucas was grateful for the reprieve. Florence needed rest desperately. He studied her as she slept, curled protectively around her unborn child. Despite the bruises and cuts, he could see she was beautiful honey-colored hair, fine features, a natural grace even in sleep. Anger surged through him again at the thought of hands striking that face, hurting her and the innocent life she carried. Lucas had seen plenty of cruelty in his years of tracking criminals across the territories, but family turning on family like this struck him as particularly foul. His own parents, long dead now, had been hard-working, decent people. His father had taught him that a man's strength was measured by how he treated those weaker than himself, not by his ability to dominate them. As dawn broke over the hills, Lucas gently woke Florence. Time to go, he said softly. Can you ride? She nodded, wincing as she sat up. I grew up riding, before I started working at the mercantile. Good. You'll ride my mare. She's gentle. I'll take the prisoner's horse. Within 30 minutes, they were on their way. The prisoner slumped over his saddle, hands tied to the pommel, Lucas leading his horse. Florence sat straight-backed on Lucas's mare despite her injuries, scanning the trail ahead and behind them with wary eyes. The morning was cool, the air scented with pine and sage. In different circumstances, it would have been a pleasant ride through beautiful country. But Lucas remained vigilant, one hand never far from his holster. Tell me about your family, he said as they rode, partly to distract her, partly to understand what they might be facing. My father is Elias Kane, Florence replied. He owns the largest silver claim in Pinos Altos. My mother died when I was 14, and after that, he got harder. I have 3 brothers, Samuel, Joseph, and Matthew. They work the mine with him. Her voice tightened. Samuel is the worst. He has father's temper but none of his restraint. Lucas nodded. He knew the type. And they all participated in what happened last night. Florence looked away. Father and Samuel did the beating. Joseph held me down. Matthew just watched, but he didn't try to stop them. Her voice broke slightly. We used to be close, Matthew and I, before everything changed. What changed? Lucas asked gently. Mother died. Father started drinking. The mine struck a rich vein, and suddenly we had money. Father became an important man in town, started talking about respectability, family honor. She laughed bitterly. Beating his daughter senseless apparently fits with his notion of honor. Lucas considered this information. A wealthy mine owner with 3 grown sons would have influence in a small town like Pinos Altos. They might face resistance even from the law if they pursued justice against the Kane family. When we reach Silver City, we'll talk to Sheriff Coleman, Lucas decided. He's a fair man. He won't be swayed by money or influence. Florence gave him a skeptical look. You really believe that? In my experience, money talks louder than justice out here. Not with Tom Coleman, Lucas insisted. We served together during the war. He's as honest as they come. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the clopping of hooves on the hard-packed earth, and the occasional groan from the semi-conscious prisoner. "Why are you helping me?" Florence asked suddenly. "You could have sent me on my way once I was rested." "Taking me along complicates things for you." Lucas considered her question. "My mother used to say that a man reveals his true character, not through his words, but through the choices he makes when confronted with someone else's suffering." He adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, Miss Kane, but turning away someone in need isn't one I'm willing to add to the list." Florence studied him with new interest. Most men she'd known spoke of practical matters, money, land, business. Few talked of character or choices. Certainly not her father or brothers, whose moral compass seemed guided solely by self-interest. "Besides," Lucas added with a slight smile, "I gave you my word. Where I come from, that still means something." They made good time on the trail to Silver City, stopping only once to rest the horses and allow Florence to stretch her legs. Lucas shared the last of his provisions with her, watching carefully to ensure she ate enough. "The baby's father," he ventured as they prepared to continue their journey. "Do you love him?" Florence's expression hardened. "I thought I did. Peter was handsome, educated, full of dreams about California and the life we'd build there." She shook her head. "I was naive. Working at the mercantile, I'd see men come through town, listen to their stories, dream of something beyond Pinos Altos. Peter seemed different from the miners and cowboys. He had soft hands, spoke like a gentleman. But he wasn't one," Lucas concluded. "No," Florence agreed. "A gentleman would have kept his promises." She mounted Lucas's mare with surprising grace despite her condition and injuries. "I don't want him back, if that's what you're wondering. I just want to protect my child." Lucas nodded, understanding. "We'll figure something out in Silver City. Coleman might know of a place where you could work and keep your baby. Or maybe there's family elsewhere who would take you in." Florence shook her head. "My mother had a sister in St. Louis, but we lost touch after Mother died. Father didn't approve of her." By mid-afternoon, the distinct outlines of Silver City appeared in the distance. The town was larger than Pinos Altos, with several streets of permanent buildings, including a 2-story courthouse where Sheriff Coleman kept his office. Lucas led them directly there, helping Florence dismount before escorting his prisoner inside. Sheriff Thomas Coleman, a barrel-chested man with a salt-and-pepper beard, looked up from his desk with surprise. "Morgan, didn't expect to see you so soon, and certainly not with such diverse company." His eyes moved from the bound prisoner to Florence, widening slightly at her bruised face. "Tom," Lucas greeted him, removing his hat. "This is Leonard Walsh, wanted for the Webster stagecoach robbery. The papers are in order." He handed over a folded document. "I need to get him to Santa Fe, but we have a more pressing situation." Coleman's gaze returned to Florence, taking in her condition and injuries with a professional eye. "I see that. Miss, would you care to sit down?" Florence sank gratefully into the offered chair, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. "This is Miss Florence Kane," Lucas explained, "from Pinos Altos. Her father and brothers beat her severely when they discovered her condition. We need protection for her, and a safe place where she can stay until the baby comes." Coleman's expression darkened. "Kane. Elias Kane's daughter?" At Florence's nod, he sighed heavily. "That complicates things. Elias has friends in territorial government. He donated generously to the governor's campaign." "Does that mean you won't help?" Lucas demanded, an edge creeping into his voice. "It means we need to be smart about this," Coleman countered. "Miss Kane, are you willing to swear out a complaint against your father and brothers? Because without that, my hands are legally tied." Florence hesitated, fear flashing across her face. "If I do, what happens to them?" "They'd be arrested, stand trial, but with Elias's connections..." Coleman spread his hands. "I can't promise they'd be convicted." "And if they're not," Lucas interjected, "they'll come after her again." Coleman nodded grimly. "That's the concern." Florence straightened in her chair, a new resolve hardening her features, despite the pain it clearly caused her. "I'll sign whatever you need, Sheriff. My family nearly killed me and my unborn child. I won't let fear of them dictate my future." Lucas felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Many women in her position would be broken by now, but Florence Kane possessed a strength that went beyond the physical. "Good for you, Miss Kane," Coleman said, his respect evident. "I'll draw up the papers right away." He turned to his deputy. "Jenkins, take Mr. Walsh to a cell, then fetch Dr. Hollister to examine Miss Kane." As the deputy led the prisoner away, Coleman pulled Lucas aside. "What are your plans after you deliver Walsh to Santa Fe?" Lucas glanced at Florence, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "I haven't decided. She'll need protection, Lucas. Even with her family behind bars, there are plenty who'd think poorly of an unmarried mother." Lucas nodded, already having considered this. "I know. I told her I'd help her figure something out." Coleman gave him a knowing look. "Just be careful, old friend. You've got a habit of taking on other people's troubles." "Some troubles are worth taking on," Lucas replied quietly. Dr. Hollister arrived promptly, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes and brisk, competent hands. She insisted on examining Florence in private, using Coleman's back office while the men waited outside. When they emerged, the doctor's expression was grim. "She's suffered considerable trauma, Sheriff. 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising, possible internal bleeding. The baby appears to be unharmed, but she needs complete rest for at least 2 weeks. No traveling." Lucas frowned. "I need to get Walsh to Santa Fe within 3 days to claim the bounty." "I can arrange for Walsh's transport," Coleman offered. "You've done the hard part bringing him in. The territorial marshals owe me a favor." Lucas hesitated, torn between his professional responsibilities and his promise to Florence. "Dr. Hollister," he asked, "is there somewhere in town Miss Kane could stay while she recovers? Somewhere safe?" The doctor adjusted her spectacles. "She can stay with me. I have a spare room, and I can monitor her condition. But she'll need longer-term arrangements eventually." She lowered her voice. "And protection from her family. Those injuries were deliberately inflicted with significant force." Coleman placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Stay the night. We'll sort out the paperwork for Walsh's transfer in the morning. I'll have my deputies keep watch for any sign of the Kanes." That night, after ensuring Florence was comfortably settled at Dr. Hollister's house, Lucas returned to the sheriff's office to discuss strategy with Coleman. "You really think they'll come after her?" Coleman asked, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey for each of them. Lucas accepted the glass, but didn't drink immediately. "You didn't see her face when she talked about them, Tom. There's real fear there, and for good reason. The kind of man who'd beat his pregnant daughter wouldn't stop at a county line." Coleman sighed. "I've put out wires to the surrounding towns, asked them to notify me if the Kanes are spotted. But my jurisdiction only stretches so far. What about the territorial marshals? This is assault, attempted murder maybe. Without witnesses beyond the victim, it's her word against theirs. And Elias Kane could call a dozen upstanding citizens to testify to his fine character." Coleman shook his head. "The law has its limitations, Lucas. You know that better than most." Lucas stared into his whiskey, frustration building within him. He'd spent years working within the law, bringing criminals to justice, believing in the system despite its flaws. But now, faced with Florence's situation, the system seemed woefully inadequate. "What would you do, Tom?" he asked finally. "If it was your sister or daughter?" Coleman took a long sip before answering. "I'd get her far away from here. Start fresh somewhere her past couldn't find her." He fixed Lucas with a meaningful look. "And I'd make damn sure she had someone watching her back." The implication was clear, but Lucas wasn't ready to acknowledge it. "I barely know her." "Sometimes you know all you need to in an instant," Coleman replied. "I saw how you looked at her, Lucas. I haven't seen that look on your face since before Sarah died." Lucas winced at the mention of his late wife, gone 8 years now to cholera. He'd loved her deeply, but briefly married just 6 months before the disease took her. In the years since, he'd avoided any attachment that might lead to similar pain. "Florence needs safety and stability," Lucas said firmly. "Not a bounty hunter with no fixed address and a tendency to attract bullets." Coleman chuckled. "Maybe what she needs is someone willing to stand between her and danger. Someone who's proven he'll keep his word." He finished his whiskey. "Just something to consider while you're deciding your next move." The following morning, Lucas went to check on Florence. Dr. Hollister led him to a small, tidy bedroom where Florence was propped up against pillows. Some color returned to her cheeks, despite the vivid bruising. "Mr. Morgan," she greeted him, attempting a smile that quickly turned to a wince. "Dr. Hollister tells me you're staying in town a while longer." Lucas nodded, hat in hand. "Sheriff Coleman is arranging for my prisoner's transport. I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." "The doctor has been very kind," Florence said, "though I worry about imposing on her hospitality for long." Dr. Hollister patted her hand. "Nonsense, dear. I welcome the company. Now, I'll leave you two to talk while I prepare some tea." When they were alone, Florence's expression grew more serious. "Have they found my family yet?" "No sign of them," Lucas assured her. "Coleman has men watching the roads into town. They won't catch you by surprise." Florence nodded, but fear lingered in her eyes. "I've been thinking about what happens next, after the baby comes." Her hand moved to her stomach in what Lucas had noticed was a habitual gesture of protection. "I can't go back to Pinos Altos." "No," Lucas agreed. "That wouldn't be safe." Dr. Hollister mentioned there's demand for teachers in the Arizona territory. I had some schooling before Mother died. Perhaps I could find work there." She hesitated. "But unwed mothers aren't typically hired to teach children, are they?" The question hung between them, highlighting the cruel reality of her situation. No matter where she went, Florence would face judgment and limited options as an unmarried mother. "What if you weren't unwed?" Lucas heard himself ask, surprising them both. Florence's eyes widened. "I don't understand." Lucas hadn't planned this, hadn't even consciously considered it until the words left his mouth. But now that they had, he realized the idea had been forming since he'd first seen her courage in the face of overwhelming circumstances. "Marriage would offer you protection," he said carefully. "Legal protection for you and the child, a respectable name." "Are you proposing to me, Mr. Morgan?" Florence asked incredulously. Lucas cleared his throat. "I'm suggesting a practical arrangement. I've been considering settling down anyway. I've saved enough for a small ranch near Socorro. It would be a safe place for you and the child, far from your family's influence." "A marriage of convenience," Florence said flatly. "Yes," Lucas confirmed, though something inside him rebelled at the coldness of those words. "At least to start." Florence studied him, her expression unreadable. "Why would you do this? Tie yourself to a woman carrying another man's child? Risk making yourself a target for my family's vengeance?" Lucas moved closer, taking the chair beside her bed. "Because I made you a promise, Miss Kane. They'll never touch you again. Marriage would give me the legal right to protect you both." He hesitated, then added softly, "And because, in the short time I've known you, I've come to admire your courage and strength. Those are qualities I'd value in a wife." Florence looked away, conflict evident in her expression. "You're asking me to make an enormous decision based on a day's acquaintance." "I am," Lucas acknowledged, "and I don't expect an answer right away. Take time to consider it. I'll be in town for a few more days while you recover enough to travel." "And if I decline?" Florence asked, meeting his gaze again. "Then I'll help you get to Arizona safely, make sure you have funds to establish yourself, and wish you well." Lucas stood, replacing his hat. "The choice is yours, Florence. I won't pressure you either way." As he turned to leave, Florence called after him. "Mr. Morgan Lucas, thank you, not just for the offer, but for being the first man in a very long time to give me a choice at all." Her words followed him as he left Dr. Hollister's house, stirring emotions he'd long kept buried. He'd meant what he said about admiring Florence's strength, but he hadn't mentioned how her vulnerability had awakened protective instincts he thought had died with Sarah, nor had he admitted the strange sense of connection he felt to her, as though their paths crossing had been more than mere chance. Lucas spent the day finalizing arrangements for Walsh's transfer to Santa Fe. Coleman's deputy would escort the prisoner the following morning, carrying authorization for Lucas to collect the bounty at a later date. With that business concluded, Lucas found himself with time to contemplate the impulsive proposal he'd made. Marriage. The word itself carried weight, conjured memories both sweet and painful. His brief time with Sarah had shown him the joy possible in a true partnership. But Florence was a stranger, carrying another man's child, pursued by a dangerous family. Was he being noble or foolish? Perhaps both. As evening fell, Lucas sat on the hotel porch, smoking a cigarette and watching the street. Silver City was lively at this hour, with miners coming off shift and heading to saloons, merchants closing shops, ladies hurrying home before darkness fell completely. Normal life continuing all around him while he contemplated a decision that would alter his future irrevocably. "Penny for your thoughts," came Coleman's voice as the sheriff settled into the neighboring chair. Lucas exhaled a stream of smoke. "Just wondering if I've lost my mind." Coleman chuckled. "So you asked her." "News travels fast. Small towns." Coleman shrugged. "Dr. Hollister mentioned it when I stopped by to check on Miss Kane. She seemed quite taken with the romantic gesture." Lucas snorted. "There was nothing romantic about it. I presented it as a practical arrangement." "Ah," Coleman nodded sagely. "That explains why Miss Kane looks so contemplative. She hasn't given me an answer yet. Give her time. It's a big decision." Coleman leaned back in his chair. "For both of you?" They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the street empty as night deepened. Finally, Coleman spoke again. "I received a wire from Pinos Altos. Elias Kane has filed a missing persons report for his daughter, claims she's mentally disturbed, and ran away during a family disagreement." Lucas crushed out his cigarette. "Disagreement? Is that what he calls beating her half to death?" "He's covering his tracks," Coleman said grimly, "setting up a defense in case she presses charges. If she's disturbed, her testimony becomes questionable." "Bastard," Lucas muttered. "Indeed, but a clever one." Coleman stood. "Just thought you should know what you might be facing if you go through with this. Elias Kane isn't a man who forgives slights to his pride." "Neither am I," Lucas replied evenly. "And he's done far worse than slight me." Coleman nodded, understanding the steel behind his friend's quiet words. "Get some rest, Lucas. Tomorrow may bring decisions that can't be unmade." Lucas slept poorly that night, his dreams haunted by Florence's bruised face and the memory of Sarah's last days. Fever, bright, and suffering. By dawn, he was already dressed and downstairs, drinking black coffee and considering his next move. A commotion in the street drew his attention. Through the window, he saw Dr. Hollister's buggy pull up outside the hotel, the doctor herself helping Florence down. Despite moving stiffly, Florence looked determined as she made her way toward the hotel entrance. Lucas met them at the door. "Miss Kane, you should be resting." "I need to speak with you," Florence said firmly. "Privately." Dr. Hollister gave Lucas a knowing look. "I'll wait in the buggy. Don't tire her out, Mr. Morgan." Lucas led Florence to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right? Has something happened?" "I've made my decision," Florence said, her voice steady despite the nervousness in her eyes. "About your proposal." Lucas felt his heart rate quicken. "And?" "I accept," she said simply. "But I have conditions." "Name them," Lucas replied, relief washing through him for reasons he wasn't ready to examine. Florence took a deep breath. "First, I want a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement. I won't be treated as a burden or obligation." Lucas nodded. "That's fair." "Second, my child will be raised as yours, with your name and all the rights of a legitimate heir. No distinctions, no reminders of his or her origins." "I would expect nothing less," Lucas assured her. "Third," Florence continued, her voice softening slightly, "I want the chance for us to build something genuine between us. Not just protection and practicality, but companionship, perhaps even affection in time." Lucas studied her face, seeing beyond the bruises to the strength and vulnerability beneath. "I want that too," he admitted. "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." Something shifted in Florence's expression. Relief, perhaps, or the first fragile tendrils of trust. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Morgan." "Lucas," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should use my given name." "Lucas," she repeated, the words sounding natural on her lips. "When shall we do this?" "As soon as possible," Lucas decided. "Today, if Judge Patterson is available. The sooner we're legally bound, the sooner I can ensure your safety." Florence nodded, her hand moving to her stomach in that now familiar protective gesture. "Today, then. I don't have anything suitable to wear, but under the circumstances. You look perfect, Lucas said, surprising himself with the sincerity of the words. Despite her bruised face and borrowed dress, there was a dignity about Florence that transcended physical appearance. A slight blush colored her cheeks. You're kind to say so. Not kind, honest. Lucas hesitated, then reached for her hand. Florence, I want you to know that, while this marriage may be starting from necessity, I intend to be a good husband to you and father to your child. You have my word on that. Florence's fingers tightened around his. And you have mine that I'll be a good wife. I don't take this commitment lightly, despite its unusual beginnings. The simple ceremony took place that afternoon in Judge Patterson's chambers, with Sheriff Coleman and Dr. Hollister as witnesses. Florence wore a blue dress borrowed from the doctor, carefully selected to accommodate her condition while maintaining propriety. Lucas had purchased a gold band from the town jeweler, simple but well crafted, a symbol of the commitment they were making. Do you, Lucas James Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Judge Patterson asked, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. I do, Lucas replied, his eyes never leaving Florence's. And do you, Florence Elizabeth Kane, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Florence's voice was clear and steady. I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife. The judge nodded to Lucas. You may kiss your bride. Lucas hesitated, aware of Florence's injuries and uncertain how she'd feel about such intimacy. But Florence made the decision for him, rising slightly on her tiptoes to press her lips gently against his. The kiss was brief, but not without feeling a promise of possibilities rather than passion. When they parted, Lucas saw something new in Florence's eyes, hope mingled with determination. Congratulations to you both, Coleman said, shaking Lucas's hand firmly. Mrs. Morgan, I wish you every happiness. The name Mrs. Morgan seemed to startle Florence momentarily before she smiled. Thank you, Sheriff, for everything. Dr. Hollister embraced her carefully. I've packed some medicines for your journey. Remember what I said about rest. Your body needs time to heal. We'll take it slow, Lucas promised. No hard riding until she's stronger. With the ceremony complete and the marriage certificate safely tucked away, Lucas and Florence faced their next challenge, leaving Silver City without attracting the attention of any Kane family associates who might be watching. Coleman provided the solution, arranging for a covered wagon owned by a trusted merchant who regularly traveled the route to Socorro. Lucas and Florence would travel with him, their presence concealed until they were well away from Silver City. We leave at dawn, Lucas told Florence as he escorted her back to Dr. Hollister's house for one final night. Pack only what you need. We can purchase supplies in Socorro. Florence nodded, her expression thoughtful. It still doesn't seem real. Yesterday I was running for my life, and today I'm married and preparing to start anew somewhere else. Does it frighten you? Lucas asked gently. Less than staying would, Florence admitted. But yes, everything is changing so quickly. She glanced at him. I hardly know you, yet I've entrusted my future and my child's to you. We'll have time to learn about each other on the journey, Lucas assured her. And I promise you this, Florence, whatever happens, whatever challenges we face, you won't face them alone anymore. For the first time since they'd met, Florence smiled without pain or reservation. That alone makes it worthwhile. Lucas felt something stir within him. At the sight of that smile, a warmth he'd nearly forgotten was possible. Get some rest, wife. Tomorrow we begin our new life together. As promised, they departed at dawn, Florence hidden beneath canvas in the merchant's wagon, while Lucas rode alongside, vigilant for any sign of pursuit. By midday, Coleman's messenger caught up with them, bringing news that the Kane men had been spotted on the road to Silver City. They'll reach town by nightfall, Lucas informed Florence as they continued their journey. But by then, we'll be well on our way to Socorro, and Coleman will ensure they find no trace of where we've gone. Florence's hand tightened around the wedding band on her finger. They won't give up easily, especially not Samuel. Let them search, Lucas said firmly. We'll be building our life far from their reach. The journey to Socorro took 5 days, traveling at a pace that allowed Florence to rest frequently, as Dr. Hollister had insisted. During those days and evenings around the campfire, husband and wife began the process of becoming acquainted as they might have during a proper courtship. Lucas learned that Florence had always loved books, that she could name every constellation in the night sky, that she hummed softly when she was content. He discovered she possessed a dry wit that emerged as she grew more comfortable in his presence, and that despite her harsh treatment by the men in her family, she hadn't lost her capacity for kindness. For her part, Florence came to understand that beneath Lucas's capable exterior lay a thoughtful man who preferred conversation to conflict, who carried grief from his past, but hadn't allowed it to embitter him. She noticed how he always ensured she ate first, how he would position himself between her and any perceived threat, how his eyes softened when they fell on her growing belly. On their third night, as they sat beside their small fire, Florence finally asked the question that had been on her mind since their wedding. "Will you tell me about your first wife? Sheriff Coleman mentioned someone named Sarah." Lucas was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "We were young," he finally said. "I was 24. She was 22. We met in Denver, where I was working as a deputy. She was a school teacher, smart as a whip, and just as sharp-tongued when something displeased her." A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. "We married after knowing each other just 3 months. Everyone said it was too quick, but when you know, you know." "What happened to her?" Florence asked softly. "Cholera. It swept through town that summer. Sarah was helping care for the sick children from her school." Lucas's expression darkened with old pain. "She was gone within a week of showing symptoms. Nothing the doctors tried made any difference." "I'm so sorry," Florence said, instinctively reaching for his hand. Lucas looked surprised at the contact, but didn't pull away. "It was 8 years ago. I grieved her properly, then moved on as she would have wanted. Became a bounty hunter because it let me keep moving, not stay in any place with too many memories. And now? Are you ready to stop moving?" Lucas turned his hand to clasp hers properly. "Yes, I believe I am." By the time they reached Socorro, Florence's bruises had faded from angry purple to yellowing green, and she moved with less obvious pain. Lucas immediately set about securing lodgings while he finalized the purchase of the small ranch he'd mentioned 10 acres, with a modest house and barn, located 6 miles outside town. "It needs work," he warned Florence as they approached the property for the first time. "The previous owner let things slide in his later years, but the land is good, with a year-round creek and enough grazing for a small herd." Florence surveyed the weathered clapboard house, the leaning fence, the overgrown garden. Where another woman might have seen only decay and endless labor, she saw possibility. "It's perfect," she declared. "It's ours." Those words, simple yet profound, affected Lucas more deeply than he'd anticipated. Ours. For 8 years, nothing had truly been his except his horse, his guns, and the clothes on his back. Now he had a wife, a home, and soon a child to call his own. The first weeks in their new home established patterns that would define their shared life. Lucas rose early to work on repairs to the house and barn, while Florence, limited by her advancing pregnancy, focused on making the interior habitable. They ate their meals together, sharing the events of their day, gradually building the foundations of a marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement, but was evolving into something more meaningful. At night, they slept in separate beds, Lucas insisting Florence take the bedroom, while he made do with a pallet in what would eventually become the child's room. Florence didn't push for more intimacy, understanding that trust needed time to develop between them, but she noticed how Lucas's gaze lingered on her more frequently, how his hand would sometimes brush hers when passing items at the dinner table. 1 month after their arrival, Lucas returned from town with supplies and a grim expression. "What is it?" Florence asked, immediately sensing his tension. Lucas placed a wanted poster on the table. "Your father has put out a reward for information on your whereabouts, $500. Florence paled, her hand moving protectively to her now prominent belly. "They're still looking." "We expected that," Lucas reminded her gently. "But we've covered our tracks well. No one in Silver City knows we came to Socorro, and we've been careful about using your maiden name." "What if someone recognizes me?" Florence whispered. "What if they come here?" Lucas moved to her side, resting his hands on her shoulders. Then they'll have to go through me to get to you, and I'm not an easy man to go through." The fierce protectiveness in his voice steadied her. "I believe you." "Good." Lucas squeezed her shoulders lightly. "Because I meant it when I said they'd never touch you again. That promise extends to our child as well. Our child." The words hung between them, significant in their implication. From the beginning, Lucas had referred to Florence's unborn baby as theirs, never drawing distinction or showing reluctance to claim a child not biologically his own. Florence turned to face him, searching his eyes. "Why did you really marry me, Lucas?" "The truth?" Lucas held her gaze steadily. "Because from the moment I found you in those woods, something inside me knew you were meant to be in my life. Call it instinct, fate, or just plain stubbornness. But I couldn't let you face your future alone." He paused, his voice softening. "And with each day that passes, I become more certain it was the right decision." Florence felt tears welling in her eyes, not from fear or pain this time, but from a swelling emotion she hadn't dared name yet. "For me as well," she whispered. Lucas's hand moved to her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the spot where a bruise had once been. "May I kiss you, Florence? Not as part of a ceremony this time, but because I want to?" Instead of answering, Florence rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their wedding kiss, this one lingered, deepened, conveyed feelings that had been building between them during their weeks of shared work and conversation. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I think I'm falling in love with my wife," he murmured. Florence smiled against his lips. "What a fortunate coincidence. I believe I'm falling in love with my husband." That night, for the first time, they shared a bed not for passion, as Florence's advanced pregnancy made that impractical, but for the simple comfort of holding and being held. As Lucas curved his body protectively around hers, one hand resting gently on the swell of her belly, Florence felt a sense of peace she'd nearly forgotten was possible. Just before dawn, she woke with a gasp as a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. "Lucas," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. "Something's wrong." Lucas was instantly alert, lighting the lamp beside their bed. "The baby?" Florence nodded, fear evident in her eyes. "It's too soon. Dr. Biku, Hollister said another 3 weeks at least." Another contraction gripped her, stronger than the first, forcing a cry from her lips. Lucas moved with decisive calm, helping her to a more comfortable position before pulling on his boots. "I'll ride for the doctor in town," he said, his voice steady despite the concern in his eyes. "Hold on, Florence. I'll be back as quickly as I can." "Hurry," she pleaded, her face contorted with another wave of pain. Lucas pressed a kiss to her forehead before rushing out. The ride to Socorro seemed endless, though he pushed his horse to its limits. Dr. Sampson was thankfully at home, and within minutes they were galloping back to the ranch, the doctor's medical bag secured to his saddle. They found Florence on the bedroom floor, a pool of blood beneath her. "The baby's coming now," she gasped. "Something's wrong, Lucas. There's too much blood." Dr. Sampson immediately took charge, directing Lucas to heat water and gather clean linens while he examined Florence. "The placenta has partially separated," he explained grimly. "We need to deliver the baby immediately, or we risk losing both of them." What followed was the most harrowing 2 hours of Lucas's life. Florence's screams tore at his heart as he held her hand, wiped her brow, murmured encouragement through her pain. Dr. Sampson worked with the methodical precision of a man accustomed to medical emergencies, but even he looked increasingly concerned as Florence grew weaker with each contraction. "She's losing too much blood," he muttered to Lucas during a brief moment when Florence had lapsed into semi-consciousness. "The baby's in distress as well. If things don't progress soon—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Lucas understood the grim implication. "Florence," he said urgently, squeezing her hand. "Florence, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain and blood loss. "Lucas, you need to fight," he told her fiercely. "Both of you, I can't lose you now, not when we've just found each other." Something in his words seemed to reach her. Florence's expression hardened with determination, and when the next contraction came, she bore down with renewed strength. "That's it," Dr. Sampson encouraged. "I can see the head now. One more push, Mrs. Morgan." Florence gathered her remaining strength for one final effort, her scream transforming into a sobbing gasp as the baby finally emerged into the doctor's waiting hands. "It's a boy," Dr. Sampson announced, quickly clearing the infant's airways. For a terrifying moment, there was silence, and then a robust wail filled the room. "And he has strong lungs!" Lucas felt tears stream down his face as he looked at his son, for in that moment, biology became irrelevant. This was his child, born of the woman he loved, to be raised under his name and protection. "Let me see him," Florence whispered weakly. Dr. Sampson quickly wrapped the baby and placed him in Florence's arms. Despite her exhaustion, her face radiated joy as she gazed at her son's tiny features. "He's perfect," she murmured. "Lucas, look what we made." Lucas knelt beside them, overwhelmed by love for this woman and child who had so unexpectedly become his family. "He's beautiful," he agreed, gently touching the baby's downy head. "Just like his mother." Dr. Sampson cleared his throat. "I still need to attend to the afterbirth and stop this bleeding," he reminded them. "Mr. Morgan, perhaps you could clean the baby while I finish with your wife?" Lucas carefully took his son, marveling at how tiny yet complete he was. 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes, a dusting of dark hair, and eyes that, when they briefly opened, seemed to study him with solemn curiosity. "Hello, son," he whispered. "I'm your father." By the time Dr. Sampson had finished treating Florence, the sun had risen. The doctor looked exhausted but satisfied as he washed his hands in the basin. "She'll recover," he assured Lucas. "But it was close. She'll need plenty of rest and good nutrition to rebuild her strength. No exertion for at least 2 weeks. And I'd advise waiting a considerable time before having another child. This birth was very hard on her body." Lucas nodded, relief washing through him. "Thank you, doctor. We'll follow your instructions to the letter." After Dr. Sampson departed, promising to return the following day to check on mother and child, Lucas sat beside Florence on their bed, the baby nestled between them. "What shall we name him?" Florence asked softly. Lucas considered. "What about James, after my father?" "James Morgan," Florence tested the name, smiling. "It suits him. James Lucas Morgan." "You'd give him my name as well?" Florence reached for his hand. "Of course. You're his father in every way that matters." Lucas swallowed past the emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you for my son, Florence, and for fighting to stay with us." "I heard your voice," she admitted, "when everything was growing dark and I wanted to let go. You called me back." Lucas leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. "And I always will." In the weeks that followed, Lucas and Florence settled into their new roles as parents, learning together how to care for their son. James proved to be a good-natured baby, with his mother's honey-colored hair and a smile that appeared startlingly early. Lucas took to fatherhood with unexpected ease, as comfortable cradling James during midnight feedings as he was mending fences or breaking horses. Florence watched with growing love as the former bounty hunter sang lullabies and made silly faces to coax smiles from their son. Their relationship deepened as well, moving beyond the initial attraction and respect to a profound partnership built on shared experiences and mutual support. When Florence was finally strong enough, they consummated their marriage not as a duty, but as a celebration of the love that had blossomed between them. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Lucas expanded their small herd of cattle, occasionally took on tracking work for the local sheriff when extra money was needed, and continued improving their property. Florence, once fully recovered, established a thriving vegetable garden, took in sewing to contribute to their income, and began teaching James the names of animals and plants as soon as he could focus his eyes. 6 months after James's birth, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Florence brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. "They're still looking for me," she said quietly. "Aren't they?" Lucas didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Your father placed another advertisement in the territorial newspaper last month. The reward has increased to $1,000. Florence sighed, looking down at James sleeping in her arms. "It's been nearly a year. Why can't they just let me go?" "Pride," Lucas replied simply. "Men like your father don't accept defeat, especially not from those they consider their property. I was never property, Florence said fiercely. None of us are. I know that. You know that. But Elias Kane sees the world differently. Lucas took her free hand. Are you afraid? Florence considered the question carefully. Not for myself, not anymore, but for James. She brushed a finger over their son's cheek. If they found us, if they tried to take him from me, that will never happen, Lucas vowed. I would die before I let anyone harm either of you. That's precisely what frightens me, Florence admitted. The thought of losing you to my family's vendetta. James deserves to grow up knowing his father. Lucas was silent for a long moment, weighing options he'd been considering for months. What would you think about moving farther west? He finally asked. California, perhaps, or Oregon, somewhere beyond your family's reach. Leave everything we've built here? Florence looked around at their home, the garden, the small but growing herd. Start over again? We'd take what matters, Lucas said. Sell the rest. We're young, strong, we can build again. He squeezed her hand. But this time, without shadows from the past hanging over us. Florence gazed at the land they'd worked so hard to tame, then back at her husband's face, the face of a man who had taken her in at her lowest moment, who had given her a name, protection, and a love she'd never expected to find. California, she said decisively. I've always wanted to see the ocean. Lucas smiled, relief evident in his expression. California it is. The decision made, they spent the next month preparing selling the cattle and most of their possessions, arranging for the sale of the property, purchasing a sturdy wagon and supplies for the long journey. Lucas was meticulous in covering their tracks, spreading word that they were heading to Colorado to join his fictional brother's mining operation. 2 days before their planned departure, Lucas returned from town with tense shoulders and a grim expression. What is it? Florence asked, immediately sensing trouble. Samuel Kane was in Socorro yesterday, Lucas said flatly. Asking questions, showing your picture around town. Florence's heart lurched. Did anyone recognize me? Not that I could determine. I've been careful to limit your trips to town, and you've changed since that photograph was taken. Lucas ran a hand through his hair. But it's too close for comfort. We need to leave tonight, not wait until Monday. Florence nodded, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. I'll pack the remaining essentials. How long will it take you to ready the wagon? 2 hours, no more. Lucas hesitated. Florence, if they find us before we can leave, they won't, she said with more confidence than she felt. And if they do, we'll face them together. Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Together, he agreed. They worked efficiently through the afternoon, loading the wagon with only what they couldn't replace: clothes, tools, family keepsakes, and enough provisions for the first leg of their journey. James watched from a makeshift playpen, occasionally babbling happily, unaware of the tension surrounding his parents' activities. As twilight approached, they were nearly ready. Florence had just placed James in his traveling basket when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Lucas immediately drew his revolver. Get inside, he ordered quietly. Take James and hide. Use the trapdoor to the root cellar if necessary. Florence hesitated, unwilling to leave him to face danger alone. Please, Lucas urged. Protect our son. I'll handle this. With a quick kiss to his cheek, Florence gathered James and retreated inside, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched as 4 riders approached their home, 3 men and, surprisingly, 1 woman. With a shock of recognition, Florence realized the woman was her youngest brother, Matthew's wife, Caroline. The men were Samuel, Joseph, and Matthew himself. Lucas stood on the porch, revolver visible but not yet raised. That's far enough, he called when the riders were within earshot. State your business. Samuel Kane, always the most aggressive of her brothers, urged his horse forward. We're looking for our sister, Florence Kane. We have reason to believe you know her whereabouts. No one by that name here, Lucas replied evenly. Just me and my wife and son. Your wife, Samuel repeated skeptically. Describe her. I don't answer to you, Lucas said, his voice hardening. This is private property. Unless you have official business, I suggest you move along. Joseph spoke up. We just want to talk to her. Make sure she's all right. After you beat her nearly to death? Lucas's control slipped slightly, revealing the anger beneath. I know exactly what kind of talk you have in mind. The Kanes exchanged glances, Samuel's hand moving toward his holster. So you do know her. Where is she? Inside the house, Florence made a decision. Placing James in a dresser drawer, padded with blankets the closest thing to safety she could provide, she took Lucas's spare revolver from the bedside table. Her father had taught all his children to shoot, never expecting his daughter would one day point a gun at her own brothers. With a deep breath, Florence stepped onto the porch beside Lucas. I'm right here, she announced, the revolver steady in her hand. Samuel's eyes widened, then narrowed with fury. So, this is where you've been hiding, with him? His gaze flicked to her left hand, noting the wedding band. You married this bounty hunter? His name is Lucas Morgan, Florence replied steadily. And yes, I'm his wife now. Father will never accept this, Joseph warned. You need to come home, face the consequences of your actions. My actions? Florence laughed bitterly. You mean surviving after you tried to beat my unborn child out of me? After you held me down while Samuel and Father took turns with their fists and belts? Caroline gasped, turning to Matthew with shocked eyes. Is this true? You told me she ran away because of a quarrel. Matthew looked away, shame evident in his posture. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Florence contradicted. And you stood by and watched, Matthew, my beloved brother who promised to always protect me after Mother died. Lucas moved slightly, positioning himself more directly between Florence and her brothers. You have your answer, gentlemen. Mrs. Morgan isn't going anywhere with you. I suggest you leave while you still can. Samuel's hand moved to his gun. We're not leaving without her. In one fluid motion, Lucas raised his revolver. Yes, you are, one way or another. The tension stretched between them, a deadly standoff in the gathering darkness. Florence could see the calculation in Samuel's eyes, the weighing of odds and outcomes. 3 against 1, but Lucas's reputation as a dead shot was well established, and Florence herself was armed and clearly determined. It was Matthew who broke the impasse, moving his horse between Samuel and Lucas. Stop this, he urged. There's been enough violence. Get out of the way, Matt, Samuel growled. She belongs with her family. Look at her, Matthew said, gesturing toward Florence. Really look. She's built a life here. She's safe, protected. He glanced back at his sister. The baby? A boy, Florence replied, her voice softening slightly. James. He's 6 months old now. Something shifted in Matthew's expression. Regret, perhaps, or the realization of what he'd nearly helped destroy. Samuel, Joseph, we're leaving. This ends now. Like hell it does, Samuel spat, his hand still on his holster. Caroline suddenly urged her horse forward. Florence, I'm so sorry for what happened to you. If I'd known... She's lying, Samuel interrupted. Don't listen to her, Caroline. She's always been deceitful ever since she was a child. I saw the bruises on her face in that photograph, Caroline countered. And I know you, Samuel Kane. I've seen your temper. She turned to her husband. Matthew, if you ever want me to speak to you again, you'll make this right. Now. Matthew straightened in his saddle, something of the brother Florence had once loved visible in his expression. Father will hear that we searched everywhere and found no trace of Florence, that she's likely dead or has left the territory entirely. He met his sister's eyes. We won't look for you again. You have my word. Matthew, Samuel protested. Enough. Matthew's voice cracked like a whip. We've done enough harm. It ends today. Joseph seemed torn, glancing between his brothers. Father won't accept this. Father doesn't need to know, Matthew said firmly. Unless you plan to tell him, Joseph? Slowly, Joseph shook his head. No, I won't tell him. Samuel looked from one brother to the other, fury evident in every line of his body. For a moment, Florence thought he might draw despite everything, but finally he spat on the ground. You're no sister of mine, he snarled. As far as I'm concerned, you died the day you ran away. That works for me, Florence replied evenly. With a final venomous glare at Lucas, Samuel yanked his horse around and galloped away. Joseph followed after a moment's hesitation. Matthew lingered, Caroline at his side. I'm sorry, Florence. I should have stopped them that night. I should have helped you. Yes, Florence agreed, not softening the truth. You should have. Is there anything I can do now to make amends? Florence considered her brother weak, but not inherently cruel, a follower who had finally found his spine. Keep your word. Make sure they leave us in peace, and be a better man than our father raised you to be. Matthew nodded solemnly. I will. He glanced at Lucas. Take care of her. Every day of my life, Lucas promised. As Matthew and Caroline rode away, Florence felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not completely gone, but lighter than it had been since the night she fled Pinos Altos. Lucas holstered his revolver and turned to her. Are you all right? Florence released a shaky breath. I think I will be. She glanced toward the house. I should check on James. They found their son still sleeping peacefully in his makeshift bed, unaware of the confrontation that might have changed his life forever. Florence lifted him into her arms, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. Do we still need to leave tonight? She asked, looking up at Lucas. He considered for a moment. I believe Matthew will keep his word. Samuel is the concern, but even he seemed to accept defeat in the end. Lucas ran a hand through his hair. Still, I think we should continue with our plan to move west. Not running away now, but moving forward. To California, as we decided. Florence nodded. To the ocean. To the ocean, Lucas agreed, wrapping his arms around his family. And whatever new adventures await us there. 3 weeks later, their wagon joined a larger caravan heading to California, their Socorro property sold to a young couple just starting out, much as they had been a year earlier. As the familiar landscape receded behind them, Florence felt not grief but anticipation for the journey ahead. The road to California would be long and likely challenging, but she faced it with confidence she'd once thought lost forever. Beside her sat the man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had kept his promise that her family would never hurt her again. In her arms was their son, who would grow up knowing only love and protection, never fear or abuse. No regrets? Lucas asked as they made camp that first night, James already asleep in his traveling basket. Florence looked at her husband in the firelight, seeing the steadfast strength and gentle heart that had become the foundation of her new life. None, she assured him, except perhaps that it took such difficult circumstances for us to find each other. Lucas pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love words sometimes failed to express. Then we'll make the most of every day we've been granted together, he murmured against her lips. Starting now. Under a canopy of stars, far from the shadows of the past, Florence Morgan embraced her future with the man who had vowed to protect her, a vow that had transformed, through shared struggles and quiet joys, into something far more profound than either could have imagined when they first met in the pine-covered hills of Pinos Altos. As their wagon train continued westward in the days and weeks that followed, Florence occasionally thought of her family, not with fear or anger now, but with a kind of distant pity for what they would never know or understand about love's true nature. Lucas had shown her that strength could be gentle, that protection didn't demand submission, that family was built through daily acts of care and respect. These were the lessons she would pass to James, and perhaps someday to other children they might be blessed with. California awaited them, with its promised ocean and endless horizons. Florence Morgan was ready, her heart full and her spirit unbroken. The girl who had fled into the darkness, bruised and terrified, had become a woman who walked confidently toward the light, secure in the knowledge that some vows, once made, endure forever.